Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving into a really provocative idea today from the Resistance to Renaissance Initiative. They're asking a pretty bold question. What if the biggest crimes happening right now are actually completely legal? Let's get into it.
So right out of the gate, they hit you with this. It's a powerful statement, and it really sets the stage for their whole argument. They're basically saying there's a huge double standard in what we call a crime, and that's the thread we're going to pull on today.
All right, so here's how we're going to break down their thinking. We'll look at what they call the old promise, then pinpoint when things went sideways. After that, we'll dig into how money affects politics, the story used to justify it all, and finally, what they propose we do about it.
So, to kick things off, they take us back in time. They want to establish a kind of before picture, a time they argue things were a lot more balanced, economically speaking. This is the world they say we've lost.
And the core of this old promise is a pretty simple idea, right? The source argues there was a time when the deal was clear. If you worked harder and produced more, you earned more. Your hard work actually led to a better life. The whole system was built on the idea that the fruits of labor were, well, shared. But, as you can probably guess, they argue that that deal didn't last. In fact, they say that entire social contract was completely shattered. And their whole case really hangs on this one pivotal moment in history, when that link between work and reward just snapped.
And here it is. This is what they call the Great Divergence. Take a look. You can see that for decades, productivity, that's how much stuff we're making, and the median wage went up together, hand in hand. Then, boom! Around the 1970s, something changes. Productivity keeps skyrocketing, but wages for the average worker just flatline. The two lines literally go their separate ways.
And the result of that split? Well, for the R2R Initiative, this is basically the original sin of our modern economy. They argue that all this new value, all this new wealth that workers were creating just stopped flowing to them. Instead, they say it got siphoned straight to the top. This, right here, is what they see as the root of the massive inequality we see today. Okay, so what happens when that much money gets concentrated in so few hands? According to the source, it doesn't just stay in bank accounts. It spills over and, in their view, totally warps our political system. It's not just about economics anymore, it's about democracy itself. And to make their point, they throw out this number, $2.6 billion. That is a huge number. And get this, according to their research, that's how much just 100 billionaire families poured into the 2024 federal elections. 100 families. And this chart really drives the point home. Look at the difference. On one side, you have millions of regular people making small donations, and on the other, you have those 100 families. And according to the source, that tiny group of mega donors actually outspends all those millions of citizens combined. They're arguing that this creates an insane imbalance of power.
So what's the bottom line here? The source cites research to make this pretty shocking claim. All that money has basically bought political power. They argue that what the wealthy want becomes policy, and what the average voter wants, it apparently has little to no measurable effect on what happens in government. It's a pretty stark conclusion. All right, so if things are that unbalanced, you gotta ask, how does a system like that keep going? Why do people accept it? Well, the next part of their argument tackles exactly that. They dive into the story our culture tells itself to justify all this. And at the very center of that story is something they call the myth of deserved greed. It's this idea, right? The belief that billionaires are billionaires because they're just smarter, they're bigger risk takers, they're individual geniuses, and because of that they've earned the right to hoard all that wealth. But they immediately push back on that. They present this contrast. On one side, you have the myth, the lone genius creating wealth out of thin air. But on the other side, you have the rebuttal, that wealth isn't created by one person. It's created by the collective work of millions of people, using public systems, roads, schools, the internet, that we all paid to build.
And they really dig into this, taking these common ideas and flipping them on their head. They say, look, hoarding massive wealth isn't a sign of merit. It's proof the system's broken. You want to talk about risk? What about the factory worker risking their health every single day? And then they get to the big one, greed. They redefine it as, essentially, the legalized theft of wealth that was created by everyone.
And all of this leads to what they call a tale of two crimes. This table is, wow, it's pretty powerful. It shows what our society chooses to punish versus what it chooses to legitimize. On the left, you've got things like being homeless or stealing food, what they call the crimes of poverty. And on the right, the crimes of power, Things like raiding pensions or suppressing wages, actions that can devastate millions of lives but are often considered just, good business.
So they've laid out the problem, and they've laid out the story they say keeps it in place. So what's the solution? Well, finally they get to their path forward. It's not just about tearing things down. They argue it's about building something new in its place.
And it's a two-part plan. First, there's resistance. That's about calling a speed, naming what they see as systemic theft, and refusing to accept the criminalization of being poor. But then there's the second part, renaissance. This is the constructive piece. It's about actually building new systems based on solidarity and cooperation, where everyone gets a fair shake.
So you can see we're not talking about small tweaks here. Their goal is, well, it's huge. They're calling for a total overhaul of the economy, to dismantle what they call systems of exploitation and build something entirely new, from the ground up, based on dignity and justice for everybody.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The source leaves us with this one really challenging question to chew on. They're asking us to completely redefine what we think of as crime. What if the biggest crime isn't what's illegal, but what's perfectly 100% legal?